What comes after NATO? Trump called NATO useless and cowards. Then he's talking about pulling 5,000 troops from Germany without telling NATO command first. Then he said he's cutting way down, way more than 5,000. Europe is now asking a question it hasn't seriously asked since 1949. What if America doesn't show up? Every now and then a story lands that feels like a hinge point. One of those moments where you can feel the architecture of the post-war world shifting under your feet. The transatlantic relationship that has underpinned Western security for 77 years is under more stress now than at any point since it was created. And the moves Europe is making in response are more significant than most people realize. Today, we're going to walk through exactly what Trump has done to NATO, why the 5,000 troops are almost the least of it, and what Europe is quietly building to replace what it might lose. Hey friends, Wes here, Army and Air Force veteran, defense journalist, and a guy who spent years on the E3 AWACS watching NATO interoperability up close, which means I have some opinions about what happens when the alliance's largest member starts flaking out. And guess what? This guy is laughing his ass off. Stop laughing. Stop. Hey, this f***ing guy. Let's get him out of here. All right. So what is Article 5 and why does it only work if everyone believes it? Well, Article 5 of the NATO Charter is the Collective Defense Clause. An attack on one member is an attack on all members. It has been invoked exactly once in NATO's history, after the September 11th attacks, when European allies came to America's defense. The entire deterrence value of Article 5, the reason it has kept a major war off European soil for 8 decades, rests on the credibility of the American commitment behind it. Specifically, the belief that if Russia rolls armor into Estonia tomorrow, US forces will be there by tomorrow night. That belief is now in genuine question, and it's not because of one tweet or post on Truth Social. I don't have a Truth Social account. I can't stomach being on there. So how did we get here? Well, the sequence of events over the past several months represents the most sustained assault on transatlantic credibility in NATO's history. It started with the Iran war. Scratch that. It actually started with Venezuela and then the threats against Greenland and Canada. But Iran is kind of a big deal too. Trump's decision to leave NATO in the dark before launching strikes on Iran inflamed tensions that had been simmering for months over his threats to seize control of Greenland and Canada, along with repeated suggestions that the United States might withdraw from the alliance entirely. When European allies declined to send warships to help reopen the Strait of Hormuz, Trump's response was not diplomatic. He called NATO useless and cowards, and has since been seemingly trying to punish his European allies. Then came the troop announcement. Senior NATO officials were not warned about Trump's decision to withdraw 5,000 troops from Germany before the Pentagon announced it. The trigger appears to have been German Chancellor Friedrich Merz publicly stating that Iran had humiliated the United States, a blunt assessment that, accurate or not, cost Germany a brigade. And Trump made clear this is not the end. Trump told reporters, we're gonna cut way down, and we're cutting a lot further than 5,000. He then raised the prospect of withdrawing troops from Spain and Italy as well. Not for strategic reasons, that would make sense, but for punishment for those countries' positions on Iran. Look, I've watched a lot of alliance management over the years. What's unusual about this moment is not that Trump is pressuring allies on burden sharing. Every US administration has done that to varying degrees. What's unusual is the use of force posture as punitive instruments against specific allies for specific political grievances. That turns a military deterrent into a bargaining chip. And once allies start wondering whether the chip will be pulled, depending on what their leader said last Tuesday, well, deterrence begins to degrade. But the missiles are the bigger problem. Here's the part that isn't getting enough coverage. More concerning than the immediate troop withdrawal is the possible cancellation of the long-range Tomahawk cruise missiles that were to be stationed in Germany in 2027. That's next year. Those missiles were a central plank of US conventional deterrence architecture in Europe, the kind of capability that gives a potential adversary serious pause before moving. Their cancellation would leave a gap that Europe has no near-term ability to fill. The rapid depletion of US stockpiles during the Iran war has left Europe and Ukraine with a significant lag in U.S. deliveries. Delays to NASAMS and HIMARS munitions have already been reported, and Patriot air defense interceptors, already in dangerously short supply, are expected to be affected too. This creates a compounding problem. European leaders invested significantly in U.S. systems since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, arguing it was faster and cheaper to order off the shelf from America rather than build European alternatives. But U.S. stockpile shortages and Trump's desire to punish Europe could force a fundamental reconsideration of that position. In other words, Europe bet heavily on American hardware, and the hardware pipeline is now uncertain precisely when the threat environment is most acute. Something has fundamentally broken. The former U.S. ambassador to NATO, Ivo Dodler, said that Trump doesn't believe America's security depends on the security of Europe. That's a position that defies decades of foreign policy logic going back to NATO's founding. And here's where it gets genuinely novel. Europe is building independent institutional architecture, the kind that takes decades to develop, but it signals a fundamental shift in strategic orientation. Europe's annual defense spending is on track to nearly double by 2030. Reaching close to $750 billion. But raw spending is the easy headline. The harder problem is what some analysts describe as fragmented industrial structure and a historic lack of procurement collaboration. Europe makes a dozen main battletech variants. The US makes one. The more interesting development is the institutional layer being built underneath the spending. Germany's Sprind, its Federal Agency for Disruptive Innovation, and Sweden's Vinnova have formalized a joint partnership to fast-track defense technology, beginning with counter-drone systems. Both agencies are modeled on DARPA, the U.S. Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency credited with creating the internet and GPS, but with the military framing stripped away. Sprind was given unusual legal latitude in how it spends money, including the 2023 Act of Parliament allowing it to take equity stakes in startups, something most German public bodies cannot do. Their first joint initiative targets the drone threat directly. Repeated drone sightings over European airports in late 2025 have rattled governments, and there is a growing anxiety about the role of Russian and Chinese-made hardware in critical infrastructure, making anti-drone technology a key focus for European police forces and militaries. The model is already spreading. The Netherlands has announced a Sprind-style agency of its own, and the European Innovation Council has been tasked with piloting challenge-driven funding. This is an institutional sovereignty story. Europe is not just buying more weapons, it is building the research-to-production pipeline that has allowed the United States to maintain a technological military dominance for 80 years. That pipeline takes a generation to mature. The fact that Europe is starting to build it now tells you everything about how seriously the continent's defense planners are taking the long-term trajectory of the American commitment. But we haven't answered the question yet. What comes after NATO? What does a post-NATO European Defense Pact actually look like? Well, here's the thing most people don't realize. Europe already has a mutual defense clause. It's Article 42.7 of the 2009 Lisbon Treaty, and its language is actually stronger than NATO's Article 5, where Article 5 says members will take such action as it deems necessary, which is deliberately vague. Article 42.7 says EU members have an obligation of aid and assistance by all the means in their power if a member state is attacked. That's stronger language. Zero operational infrastructure behind it, but it has never been invoked, tested, or even seriously defined. The EU's top military official told Euronews that work to operationalize the Mutual Defense Clause should concentrate on the circumstances below the threshold of NATO's Article 5. Hybrid threats, humanitarian crises, gray zone attacks, rather than full conventional war. So that does say something about how seriously the clause has been taken until very recently. That is now changing fast, and the architecture being assembled is more concrete than most people appreciate. Let's start with the bilateral layer. In 2025 alone, almost 20 bilateral defense agreements were struck between European states, reflecting urgency to build defense production capacity and reduce dependence on the United States. 6 of these partnerships now include explicit mutual defense clauses involving France, Finland, Germany, Greece, Poland, Sweden, and the United Kingdom, with France and the UK leading the pack with 3 such clauses each. Germany and the UK have signed a treaty of friendship and bilateral cooperation, France and Poland have signed an enhanced cooperation and friendship treaty that includes mutual security guarantees. What's emerging is a complex web of partnerships, some comprehensive, others focused on joint procurement and technical standardization, others on operational defense planning and military mobility. Now we add Canada. Prime Minister Mark Carney and my longtime man crush signed a strategic defense and security partnership with the European Union in June of 2025, opening the door for Canadian companies to participate in the $1.25 trillion Rearm Europe program. That's a step explicitly framed as reducing Canada's reliance on the United States. Canada currently directs roughly 75% of its defense procurement spending toward U.S. manufacturers. Diversifying that supply chain and the strategic relationships that come with it is now a stated Canadian government priority. By December of 2025, Canada had concluded a final agreement to formally participate in the EU Security Action for Europe program, the first country outside Europe to do so, by the way. So, what does this hypothetical full pact actually look like if you assemble the pieces? Well, structurally, it would be tiered. An inner core, France, Germany, the UK, Poland, the Nordic states, and Canada operating under hard mutual defense commitments, with existing bilateral clauses providing the legal scaffolding. A broader outer ring using Article 42.7 as the framework for lesser threats. Hybrid attacks, cyber warfare, gray zone provocations. The EU's Permanent Structured Cooperation, which is called PESCO, already includes 26 of 27 EU militaries. It provides the procurement and interoperability backbone. The European DARPA layer, Sprint and Sweden's Vinnova, and their growing network of imitators provides the technology pipeline. The obstacles are real and should not be minimized, like unanimity requirements in EU decision-making, things like Europe producing a dozen main battle tank variants to America's one, fragmentation that drives costs up and interoperability down. Let me play devil's advocate on that one though. There is a problem with having one uniform system across all of these different countries' militaries. If Russia finds a vulnerability with one particular frame, all of a sudden, all of the tanks have the same vulnerability and Russia knows how to defeat it. So maybe having multiple versions of main battle tanks isn't such a bad idea. Anyways, the UK's post-Brexit status also complicates its integration into EU defense structures, even as it builds bilateral relationships with virtually every major European military. And experts are explicit that this architecture could complement NATO, but is nowhere near as comprehensive as the NATO alliance. Not a substitute then, a supplement. But here's the strategic logic that makes this more than just a bureaucratic paper shuffling. NATO's deterrent value has always rested on the Americans' credibility. A European-Canadian pact deterrent value would rest on something different. Geographic commitment. France, Germany, Poland, the Nordics, and Canada are not debating whether Europe is worth defending because of what a leader said about Iran last Tuesday. Their populations live there, or their strategic interests are structurally intertwined with it. That's a different kind of guarantee. Less powerful in raw military terms, more reliable in political ones. The question isn't whether the structure can replace the United States. It can't. Not for a decade or more. The question is whether it can make Russian adventurism uncertain enough for long enough to give European capability time to mature. That's a narrower bar, and it may be the only bar that actually matters right now. So NATO was built on a simple premise. American power, underwritten by American credibility, makes an attack on any member too costly to contemplate. Well, for 77 years, that premise held. Not because it was tested, but because no adversary seriously doubted it. It is now being doubted more than ever, not by Russia, but by Europe. When your allies start building their own DARPA, buying fewer American weapons, and quietly asking whether Article 5 is still operational, that is not anti-Americanism, that's just contingency planning. And contingency planning of that seriousness only happens when people in very serious rooms have concluded that the guarantee they've relied on may no longer be reliable. Trump may or may not pull further troops. He may or may not cancel the Tomahawks. He may or may not still be in office when the next crisis arrives. Europe has apparently decided it can no longer afford to wait and find out. That's it for today, my friends. Subscribing is the best free way to support my military analysis. If you haven't noticed, I'm an American who is disgusted with our foreign policy at the moment. I believe in honoring alliances and standing up to dictators. I do have a newsletter on Substack if you want the deeper written work, and as always, glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Crimea is Ukraine. Stretch it out. Here we go. Here we go. You ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? I'm ready. Well, of course I'm ready. Are you ready? That's what I'm asking.